All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Planet Dirt. My name is Alicia, if you're new. And today we are inside. We are not in the greenhouse. And we are sitting at a very exciting spot. This is my seed starting station. Say that 10 times fast. It's not actually a station. It's a plastic table that I stick some grow lights on. But it's a very exciting time because it means that I get to start seeds soon. So I'm still happy to be here. It is a little bit too cold outside to be out there, even in the greenhouse. I think it got down to like 13 degrees last night. It was quite chilly here. So we are inside today, and I do get to start some onion seeds soon, which I'm very excited about. But I made myself finish my garden plan. So in the last garden planning video, we went over the greenhouse and some grow bags and what I plan to do in my green stalks. And I've done that to some extent every year because I need to know how many basil plants I need to start, for instance, right? And how many tomatoes I really should be starting. I usually start way more than I should be starting, but how many I ideally should be starting. So that part of it, while it took a little bit of time because there are lots of little nuances based on the greenhouse, and the green stalks do have several spots to plant in per tier. It's a little time consuming, but it was a lot more straightforward, I think. When I went and started to plan the outside growing space, I ran into a few snags just because I've never actually done that before for outside. Usually I just start a ton of stuff that I want to grow, and then I kind of figure out where to put it later, which is not the ideal thing to do, as I learned last year. So this year I'm just trying to be a little bit more meticulous, methodical about what I'm putting where, and making sure it makes sense, and actually trying my best to get a good yield. I generally do get a good yield on something, but it's just kind of, I would like to be more intentional about it. So this is my attempt. I went out this morning and I measured my big, long, in-ground garden bed. And that's when I realized it's really cold outside today and I didn't want to go outside again, which is why we're in the house. But I did go out there to measure, and it's really, really long. So I have on the right side of this bed, I'll bring up a picture of the general area that I'm talking about. But on the right side of this bed, I have two raised beds, and they are 2x4, I believe. They're not very big, but they're enough to grow things that trail really well. I really liked having them last year because everything that grew in it grew a lot easier, a lot more vigorously, and it's just because I had way more control over the soil. The rest of that big long bed that I grew in, I had never touched the soil before. There were some, there's a perennial bulbing bush thing that grows out there. I don't know. I'll link a short to it. It's the king of weeds. This thing comes back with a vengeance at least 2 or 3 times a year, and I have to cut it back. And I think I finally dug out all the bulbs because I don't see any more sprouting, but it's still cold, so it could come back later anyway. Long story short, I have never grown anything in that big bed before last year. So last year, the only prep I did, because again, it was springtime, and I was like, oh, I have all of these squashes and random bush beans and stuff like that I want to grow and I want to plant, and I have nowhere to put them. So last year, all I did was rake off the top of the soil, put like 2 inches of compost down, mix it in a little bit. I have one of those little weed eating tools, that mixes up the soil. I don't even remember what it's called. It's got like 4 prongs and it goes like this. I don't know. I used one of those and I just worked it into the soil a little bit. But that's pretty much all I did. I threw in some organic fertilizer, but organic fertilizer doesn't work for at least a few months. I didn't put in any liquid fertilizer, liquid soluble fertilizer. And so there were things in there that did really well. But they were things that they kind of will do well no matter what soil they're thrown in, like corn. My corn that I put out there did fantastic. There wasn't very much of it, so I didn't get an insane yield because I wasn't out there like pollinating it. But they grew really tall. They looked beautiful. I had a few of the beans grow really well, and a couple of the squash plants did okay. Like there were a couple of gourds that did all right. But mostly the plants just didn't grow very well. They didn't grow very big. I struggled a lot with pests. I've talked about that some. And so I think this year I'm going to amend the soil again. I did mulch it very heavily in the fall, and I'm thinking that's going to help a lot with the soil. I did a lot of chop and drop for the plants that I had in there, so I didn't remove a lot of stuff. I tried to add a lot of organic material back into the soil this year, or this past year. And then in the spring, I'll get a bunch more compost and compost it again and do the fertilizer again. So, and hopefully the fertilizer from last year will have become more bioavailable by the time I'm planting it this spring. So all of that is to say, I'm hoping that the soil won't be that big of an issue this year. I toyed around with the idea of adding a couple more of those small raised beds to the area because the area is very long, but it's not very wide. Because if you get much wider than it is, then it comes way into the grass line, which I guess I could do, but I have kids and they like running around in the grass. I'm not trying to take their entire play area away. And then the other side, there's a lot of stumps from when they cut down trees right before we moved in. So when we first moved in, there were just a ton of like this big around stumps along that tree, along that fence line. And so I can't exactly plant on top of a post without digging it out. And let's face it, I'm kind of lazy when it comes to stuff like that. I'm just going to do what works until it doesn't work anymore, and then I'll do the hard job. Okay, so first I started with what is already in the raised bed. So what's in there right now is garlic. The far right bed, I have elephant garlic planted in there. It's looking pretty good. It's starting to pop up out of the mulch, which is pretty typical here. It'll grow up out of the mulch for a month or two, and then between January and February, we just get way too many hard freezes, and it kind of stops growing. And then once it starts to warm up a little bit in March, it's not quite above freezing all the time at night, but it's warm enough that it starts growing again. So those are looking really good. I will plan on planting something in there, probably some bush beans or something that grows really fast, but I'll worry about that in like June-ish when it's time to pull that garlic out. I could also do a succession of summer squash in there, depending on how my other summer squash is going. So that's also an idea. Maybe I'll have some, if my other squash isn't doing great by that time, maybe I'll put some other squash in that bed instead. So I don't know. We'll deal with that one later. So right now it's got garlic in it. Next to that bed, there is another little raised bed, and my idea is to put trellises all along the back of this entire in-ground garden bed, and that includes this one little tiny raised bed. I don't really separate it because it's so small, but in my little spreadsheet, it just looks the same, but it is separate. It's raised up a little bit. So I'm going to have a trellis going along the back, and my idea is this is where I'm going to start my indeterminate tomatoes. I've had issues with in the past because I've tried to grow them in the greenhouse and they just run out of room because they grow way too fast. In the in-ground garden and in that raised bed, I did have some cherry tomatoes last year, and they were kind of slow to take off, but I think that was my fault. I think I just overcrowded them in there. So in this one little mini raised bed, I'm going to put tomatoes all along the back, and I'm only going to put, I believe it's a 4-foot stretch. So I think I'm only going to put 3 or 4 tomato plants. I'll start 4 for this section, and then when I get out there and I'm spacing things out, we'll see how it looks and see if there's actually room for that many. And then in front of the tomatoes, I'm going to have room for my basil and my marigolds. So I've had a lot of success companion planting those. I hardly ever deal with tomato hornworms. I think I've had like 2 in my garden out of like 4 years that I've been gardening here now. And it's because I always have a lot of basil and a lot of marigolds right next to my tomatoes, and it helps keep them all away. Moving to the next section, I broke up the long in-ground bed into 4-foot sections, and there's actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 6 4-foot sections. So it's actually a 24-foot long bed, which again, it sounds really long, right? But then I put it in my grid, and then I stretched it out. And then when I started putting in plants, a summer squash is going to get huge. They get like 3 feet wide. And so that's like almost an entire 4-foot section just by itself. So it's only about 2 feet deep, but it's 24 foot wide. So I started out with the section coming down from the raised beds just because I started there, because that's where stuff is already planted. And then I just worked my way down. So the first section right next to the tomatoes, I'm going to put a couple more tomatoes. And then I'm also going to have my tomatillos right there. So I've had tomatillos grow not this past year, but the year before. I had them in the greenhouse. Again, they went absolutely crazy. There was not enough space for them at all. I actually did get quite a few tomatillos out of it, but the plants were just crazy. They were insane. There was no way I was going to keep up with them. So I'm going to put them outside, and I'm going to put them along my trellis. That way they have something to grow up. And if they end up going crazy and falling over the other side of the trellis, then who cares, right? But that's my plan. I'm going to put the tomatoes, tomatillos, and then in the bed in front of them, I'm going to start planting squash. So I'm going to try to squeeze as many summer and winter squash into this big long raised bed as I can. It's the sunniest spot in my yard, and so I'm trying to take advantage of all of that sun and grow some really big plants. So wish me luck. All right, and then one last note about that first bed is that I got a couple of notes from people after my, I think it was my seed haul video. I'll link it. But I got a couple of notes from people saying that a good pest deterrent is also dill and fennel because they're very aromatic. And so I'm also leaving room in this bed and the bed next to it to throw in some dill and some fennel. Dill is pretty short-lived here just because it gets so hot, but I've had really good luck with fennel too. So I'm planting both. I did get a slow bolt variety of dill as well, and I have a bunch of winter sown right now, so hopefully I'll get a great deal of it to be able to put in those first 2 beds. And then as we work our way down the beds, I'm going to try some other things as well, and we'll just see what works best. Or if, none of it works and maybe the squash bugs here just laugh at me. I don't know. That's what they did last year. They just laughed their little butts off as they were chomping on all my plants. So that's what's going to go in that bed. Moving over one more bed. I'll bring it up here, and I am planning on putting a row of cucumbers that again are going to be trellising up the back. I'm trying to put anything that grows really tall and sprawls that can sprawl up that trellis. I'm trying to put it along the back here so that I have room for other little things in front of it, or at least that's my plan. Who knows? So On that, I have a few different types of cucumbers. I have national pickling. I have the Armenian long cucumber that I actually really liked last year. It wasn't very productive. I got like 3 or 4 cucumbers. They were huge. They tasted great. I made some really good cucumber tomato salads out of it. And they were delicious, but it just wasn't very productive. And again, I think that was my fault. I think I just overcrowded the cucumber bed last year. And so things were just all mangled and on top of each other, and they probably just couldn't, the pollinators probably didn't even know which way was up. So I certainly didn't. So why would I expect them to? So I'm going to have a row of just the cucumbers right there. I'll probably be able to get 4 to 6 plants along that row. And then in front of it, again, I'm going to have another squash. I think I put another summer squash in front of it because, again, the cucumbers are going to grow tall up the back. The summer squash I'll put more towards the front, and it'll have room to sprawl kind of out into the yard area. And I'm hoping they won't overlap or compete with each other. So that's the plan for that one. I also have more nasturtiums in that bed because you can never have too many nasturtiums. I just think they're beautiful. They don't last very long in this climate because, again, it just gets too hot. But I put them kind of kitty corner, like behind the squash. So I'm hoping like if they get shaded out between the squash and the cucumbers that they'll last a little longer because it'll stay a little cooler in that little pocket. So I'm hoping I'm going to give them a chance to bloom a little bit longer here, but they're just beautiful. I love having them in the garden. My next beds are where I'm going to have some winter and summer squash. And again, I positioned, hopefully, this is my plan. Who knows if it's actually going to work out this way. But my plan is to put the winter squash, again, right up next to the trellis and have it vine up. Now, I didn't do that with all of my winter squash. As you'll see in the spreadsheet, some of my winter squash is closer to the yard line instead of the trellis. And that is on purpose because I have some winter squash that are smaller. I have like baby boo pumpkins that are really great for decorations. I grew a bunch of them last year and they did really well for me. And then I have like little mini gourds and stuff like that. But the bigger ones, I'm hoping to actually get some big pumpkins this year. And so the pumpkins, I don't want to have to worry about going over there and hooking them onto the trellis as they get big. Fingers crossed that they actually grow and that they get big this year because I got 0 decent sized pumpkins. The biggest pumpkin I got, I think, was like this big last year. It was pretty sad. They were very cute, but I didn't get the big pumpkins that I wanted. So we're going to try again this year. So those ones I am going to have sprawl the other way, and they can trail a little bit into the yard and it'll be fine. And the lattice that I put up to keep the dogs out on that side of the yard, I'll link a video to that, or I'll link to that video so you can see what I'm talking about. But I have grown winter squash next to that lattice before, and it just goes right through it. It doesn't impede the vine progress at all. It just weeds right through it. And so if it needs to vine out into the yard, then that's totally fine. And hopefully by then the plant is big and vigorous enough that if the dogs, kick by it, it won't care. So I'm hoping that's going to work out. So the other thing I wanted to note is that I am going to put corn in this bed in 2 spots. This is not corn that I'm expecting to get a huge harvest out of. It's more of my way of creating a natural shade for these plants. This side of my yard gets an insane amount of sun during the summer, and it gets very hot. And last year, what happened was I had corn growing on just the left side, and I mainly had like a 1 by 2 foot block of it. It wasn't very much. It wasn't enough to get a huge harvest or anything. But what happened was right next to that block, all of the squash and beans and things that I had planted right next to it. I had my own little Three Sisters thing happening right next to it. But by the time the corn was super tall in the later summer, the heat was just insane. And so it was giving the squash a nice reprieve from the afternoon sun a little bit earlier. And so those squash did really well. That's where I got most of my little baby blue pumpkins from. I got some funky looking gourds from right next to there because that whole area, it got plenty of sun during the morning and during the middle of the day. And then 4 or so o'clock would hit and it was in the shade and it was no longer getting just roasted. So that's my plan. I'm going to put corn in 2 different spots in this bed, and hopefully they're far enough apart that it's going to help build a little bit of a shade barrier in 2 different spots and just give that bed a little bit of reprieve by the time late summer comes and it's just baking. So that's my other note, is I'm going to put the corn there, and then in this chart I also put beans because I'm going to put beans right along the corn. I'm going to direct sow them together. I think you're supposed to plant the corn and then a couple weeks later you're supposed to plant the beans. I'll have to look it up. But basically the corn just becomes a little trellis for the beans and it works out really well. I do have a picture of that from last year. I'll put it up here. I did this and there was a giant, and I'm talking like this thing was like this big and it was really fat. I don't live in Texas. I'm not used to, bugs the size of house cats. And so we went out there and there was a grasshopper just munching on all of my beans, and it was living on that corn stalk, and it was actually it was super cool. So I don't even mind if I lose some of my crop to things like that because it's just so fun, and random. I was out there and it was kind of green, so it blended in a little bit, but it was just very cool looking. So I'm still going to have the beans next to the corn, and then one bed over, I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to have some summer squash, I'm going to have my winter squash, and I'm going to do the corn again on the side so that I can have the beans growing up it, and it's going to provide some shade. So that is my general plan for that side of the yard. And the rest of my in-ground space outside, I also have a little in-ground garden bed running along the back fence of our house. And I'm not making a plan for that because most of it is perennials, and so they're just going to stay where they are. It has a bunch of grapevines. It has a ton of herbs back there. I did grow a few more herbs to be adding to it and filling in some spaces where there's space, but I'm not going to make a whole plan for it just because that space is kind of already planned out. The only thing that I have growing in there right now that will need to be taken out and something else will go in its place is that's also part of my garlic bed. So I have elephant garlic growing on the side out in that raised bed. And then I also have hardneck and some softneck regular garlics out in the bed that is going along our back fence. So all right, so I'm not going to do a separate plan for the back in-ground bed because it's mostly sorted with perennials and it's not going to change really that much. So I got most of the in-ground garden bed on the side of the house all done, and I did a little math. So I came up with a list of all of the stuff that I want to grow in there, and then about how many of each thing that I want to grow. And this actually was super helpful for me because I already know that I'm probably going to have to change something around. So this is not set in stone. This is me just taking a first crack at what can go in that bed, what I can fit in that bed. And ideally, if I could grow everything, what I would have to do. So based on this list, I already know I might have to move some things around because I have on this list 7 summer squash, which sounds about right. There are quite a few varieties, so I think I could probably reasonably trim that down to 7 varieties, right? Because if I grow 1 green zucchini and 1 yellow zucchini and then a lemon squash, and there are a few others that I have every year, I could very easily narrow that down to 7. I could probably go down to like 5, which I might do because based on this list, I also would only have 6 winter squash. And I can already tell you that that's probably not enough to grow all of the different varieties that I want to try this year. So I might switch out a couple of the summer squash for a couple of winter squash, because the summer squash, honestly, they're just so prolific when you get them going. And I might have more room to start a second succession of them, like I said, in that garlic bed. So I might just cut out a couple of them and put more eggs in the winter squash basket just so that I can have more variety. And the reason I want to do that is because last year I grew a baby bear pumpkin and a baby boo pumpkin and a couple of different gourds. And I really want to do those again because 1, they did really well. And 2, they made so many great decorations for the fall, and I love decorating with pumpkins for the fall, and it was really nice to have those. And then I even like spray painted a few of them black that were like too small to really eat or use for anything. I spray painted them black, and then I had black and white, and then we made a little tic-tac-toe game out of them. I don't know if you've seen that, but it turned out really cute. Anyway, so I like having them for those purposes. And then the ones that were slightly bigger, we ended up making like a little pumpkin dessert out of it. And it's like a little personal size pumpkin dessert. Is really cute. So those ones are definitely useful. I want to do those again. But then I also know that there are several different types of pumpkins that I want to try this year. Long Island cheese, Blue Hubbard. I want to try a jack-o'-lantern again this year, see if I can, or a Cinderella, one of those, and see if I can get it to go. That's already 6 different types of winter squash. And I think there were, only 6 on my list? Yeah, 6 on my list. And I know there's more than that. That doesn't even count butternut or the crookneck or anything like that. So I already know I'm going to switch this around a little bit. But that's honestly why this was so good of an exercise for me to do, because I would have just started all of them and then I would have been sad when I didn't have room. So it gives me a little more control. So based on that, I have a number of pole beans that I'm going to plant. I have plenty of seed for that. I save seeds from my pole beans every year because they're just so easy to save. And so I have some new ones that were sent to me in the grab bag, but I also have a ton from seed that I've saved from last year. So I'm not worried about having that many or enough seeds for that. 36 corn plants based on this, which is actually not that many. I'm not expecting a huge yield out of it, but I definitely have that many seeds. And again, I got a few different varieties in the grab bag this year. So we'll play around with it, see what happens. Cucumbers, I'm going to need 16-ish plants. That sounds like a lot, but honestly, there are a lot of different varieties, and that ensures that I'll probably get at least a pickling cucumber, a slicing cucumber, and then I can probably do the Armenian long again, and see if it has a better yield if I have it in a better spot. Because actually, I really liked that one. The taste was really good. It lasted way longer, I think, than some of the other cucumbers that I've tried. So I really want to try that one again. My indeterminate tomatoes, I have room for 10-ish in this area. I put 10 down, but I might only plant 8 or 9 because I really want to give my tomatoes a good chance this year by not overcrowding them And I think that's my biggest problem, and I just need to learn to hold back a little. So I'm going to try really hard. I'll probably start 10 and then, give some away or try to pare down. And if there are weak ones, they'll just get cold, I guess. I don't know, like I ever do that. Tomatillos, 4 tomatillo plants for this section. That sounds like not a lot, but if you've ever grown tomatillos before, they are insane plants. They keep growing and they grow insane. They're crazy. They're kind of like an indeterminate tomato on steroids. They just keep growing and they grow in every single direction. And you don't even know what to prune because you're like, is this the main stem? I don't even know because I can't tell. I can't see. So I'm only doing 4 of those. You only need 2 to cross-pollinate, but I'm trying my luck with 4 because I haven't had great success with germination and transplanting tomatillos. The first time I tried growing them, I did get a good harvest, but I remember starting like 6 plants and I think I only got like 2 of them to grow pretty big. So again, it might have been something I did. It probably was something I did. I probably overcrowded them or some other such tale, but I am going to start 4 just to be safe. All right, so we're almost at the end, and the only thing left are like my companion plants. But I'm really glad I did this because it says I need to start 24 marigolds, which is a really high number. It was not something that I was expecting. I don't know that I've ever started that many. I think I've started like maybe 10. But this is why I did this, because I want to make sure I have enough flowers to be interplanting, to be doing companion planting. So I'm going to have 24 marigolds, 15 nasturtiums. That sounds like a lot. But again, that is pretty big. And I want to make sure that I'm putting enough around to help deter the pests, if they do indeed help to do that. And I also, if I have a few left over, I can always put them in the green stock or something, or pots or something. I love nasturtiums. I'm not going to plant too many nasturtiums. Dill and fennel, I need 5 of each. So the dill, I definitely know that I have that covered with I did some winter sowing and there's dill in there. I did not winter sow the fennel because I haven't had that issue with germination with fennel, but now I'm thinking I probably should and I can. So I think I have a couple of milk jugs left over. I added to my winter sowing since the last video. I threw a few more flowers and stuff in there, but I did not add fennel. And this is specifically the leaf fennel is what I was told. So, and I've really only successfully grown the bulbing fennel. So I think maybe I'm going to do something more winter sowing and throw the fennel in there too, just to make sure it germinates. So, all right. Well, I think that's all for this one. I'm losing a little bit of light because it's in the afternoon. I can't wait until it's spring again and I don't run out of light at like 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. But thanks for coming along with me today, and I'll see you next time for some seed starting. Bye, everyone.